Congrats on a great day so far, and thanks everyone for coming on out after lunch. We know that that's the toughest panel to host, and so we're going to step up our game and make it worthy of skipping the post-lunch nap. So let me just, here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to frame up collective impact, that frame real quickly for you all, and then turn to my esteemed panelists and ask them to kind of integrate how their own work in community connects to the idea or the notion of collective impact. So let me just tell you who we have here, because it's quite impressive. So Renata, to my immediate left, Simril, who leads the LA84 Foundation, which is pretty cool, corpus of the savings of the benefit of LA's Olympics. And they're invested in creating much greater access to play in LA, and we'll hear about that. Next to her is Jamie Schmill, who is the program officer for Laureus USA and doing deep work in New Orleans, and we'll hear more about that deep work and how it connects to collective impact. Sara Couppas is program manager for sports and nutrition at the Clinton Foundation, and leads a Houston-wide coalition to improve access to sport. So we'll get deep on Houston, having a big convening down there next week. So that's pretty exciting. Bruce Lee, who is the director for the Global Obesity Prevention Center at Hopkins University. He's authored over 175 scientific publications and 3 books. HuffPo contributor, Forbes contributor, and also like the man behind the data you saw at Tom's early, let's go deep on a city, what would happen if we changed play and how would that affect obesity and life expectancy, and that's all his cool geeky data. The man is not a geek, I didn't mean this to imply, but for those of you who are geeks in the audience, this is your guy. And so we'll get to hear more about Bruce's really powerful work on data aggregation and collection. And last but not least, Laurence Chalip. Is that correct, Laurence? I just don't want to miss Chalip. I almost got all the way through the intros without a mistake. My bad. So professor and department head at the College of Applied Health Services at University of Illinois. But most importantly, probably this conversation, he helps to lead an Illinois statewide effort around Illinois youth sport with some other leaders in the room. And so it's exciting to have his point of view. So you've got a kind of cross-section of communities and states and leading thinkers in this deeper work. So what is this deeper work? Well, we sometimes call it collective impact. How many of you are familiar with this expression, this term, collective impact? Raise your hand. Hi if you've heard it. So it looks like 77% of the room. So how many of you got a little nauseous when you heard those 2 words together because of the buzz speak around it? It's funny because when I do this with funders, they're all like, oh my God, if I hear collective impact. Because it's sort of become a term for kind of everything in some cases and thus nothing. But what's important about it is it's about breaking down the silos in our work to get to better outcomes, to get from isolated impact to aggregated impact, to think about the ecology of your work, and how do you think about all the relationships. And in this case, that would involve sport. You'll see in the report that everybody got in your packet a kind of summary of these 5 core elements of collective impact. So let me just tell you about these 5 core elements. An organization named FSG, which is sort of kind of a slick consulting firm with lots of super overeducated MBAs, really did a lot of research on what makes for effective community collaboration. And what they identified were these 5 core elements. And I'm just going to run you through them. You should, for those of you who can see the slides, you should be able to see kind of a quick slide. We just did 1 slide that names the 5 elements, and then we'll ask my panelists to kind of speak to what resonates from those elements of success in deep community collaboration as it relates to access to play. So first is this idea of a common agenda. I mean, none of this is rocket science, but you have to agree to a common agenda to get to collective impact. So if folks at the table come with very different agendas, you're not going to get to the goals or outcomes you want to achieve. Related to that is the idea of shared measurement. It's exciting to have Bruce on this panel. One of the biggest challenges in collective impact and community impact in general is everybody's measuring something different. If you show me one sophisticated grant seeker in a community who gets government contracts or who seeks foundation support from groups like several of these folks up here, and I will show you someone who's filling out 12 different reports for 12 different metrics for 12 different outcomes. And so how do you in a community create this idea of really shared measurement and really measurement for continuous improvement? That's the other thing we need to do when we think about deep community impact, is move away from punitive sort of, oh, you didn't meet your metric goal so you don't get the grant, but more thinking about common measurement as instead of a hammer, a flashlight that helps guide your work in community around greater access to play. So the second core thing that they found in successful collaboratives that actually move the needle on change, regardless of the issue, from healthcare access to homelessness, the second one was shared measurement. The third is this idea of mutually reinforcing activities, right? That if you thought about a collective impact initiative that was running on all cylinders in a community around play, then what folks were doing with young people having access to Little League would mutually reinforce what folks were doing to make sure young people had access to Ultimate Frisbee. So, okay, at Little League, we have tryouts on these dates, or we sign up teams on these dates. Well, we're going to sign up teams for Frisbee on these. There's a coordinated approach to the activities that folks are already going to do anyway, so that they are mutually reinforcing. The idea that there's a larger plan that folks are able to connect to and leverage so that actually the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. What are the mutually reinforcing activities? Related to that is this idea of continuous communication, that to get to real impact in community, it is not a one-time deal. It is not a one-time meeting. It's figuring out those communication loops that have to happen all the time between the different partners in that community, and how do you do that? And how do you make it consistent? And last of those 5 elements is this idea of backbone support. How many of you have heard this kind of language of the backbone organization or backbone support? A lot of folks, for a bunch of play people, a lot of folks are not willing to really go all the way. Like, you can go all the way to the, reach for the sky. So, it looked like 28% of you said you'd heard about backbone support. So this idea of the backbone is, if you think about systems today in our communities, if you tell a system, if you tell the Parks and Rec system in your community, hey, we need you to partner extensively with mutually reinforcing activities and shared metrics, extensively with the K-12 system in our community, what happens, right? Somebody goes, okay, that becomes 12% of my job or 10% of my job to go figure out how to work with the schools. And it becomes 10% of somebody at the school system's job to go figure out how to work with the local business sector. And it doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work, right? Because everybody's already got 110% on their plates. So you need a backbone, is what we've learned in this collective impact work. You need someone to play a role. Sometimes funders do it almost by default. You need a person or persons who wake up every day saying, how am I going to connect the systems? How am I going to connect the leagues today? How am I going to be the connective tissue? Or else this kind of idea of deeper, more impactful collaboration just doesn't get to the finish line. So those, I had to run you through those. Those are the 5 core elements of collective impact. There's even a conversation about, at the national level, can there be a backbone for the work? In some ways, I think this program at Aspen plays a bit of a backbone role in helping to coordinate and connect different partners in the work. But at the community level, those 5 core elements are what get to shared or collective impact. Here's what we've learned. We launched at Aspen with FSG, the folks who have done all this research, something called the Collective Impact Forum, www.collectiveimpactforum.org, for those of you who want to learn more. Tons of resources, tons of case studies. We should soon have some on sports there. And what we, 5 is enough, but what we know has been missing, and what I think you all are ahead of the curve on as a network and a partnership, are 2 other pieces that just don't get lifted up enough when you talk about community collaboration for change. One is the idea of equity, and the First Lady hit on this hard, right? If you are aligning systems that already have inequitable access to them, then kind of what's the point, right? If you're going to align this league with this program, with this school, and all of those systems are baked in a way where structural racism is already a barrier, where institutional racism is already a barrier, where economic biases lead to folks not being able to participate, I would submit to you what's the point. So one is you've got to ground this work in deep community change around play in the frame around equity and access to opportunity, and measure that as you think about common metrics. And the other is, and Project Play nails this with the Play 1, is constituent voice, community voice. Having a bunch of super high level leaders in a community working across systems is one thing, but in this case, if you don't have youth voice at the table in these partnerships, you're probably going to miss your mark. So those are the other elements that folks need to think about including and involving in their work. So that's the framework. That's how we think about collective impact at Aspen. And now we have a chance to talk to people who are actually trying to do this hard work with partners in the community from the get-go. So let's jump in and let's figure out if you guys are willing to touch on it. If you think about that framework, where are some of the areas that you all, what resonates for you? Where are you making headway around those 5 elements? And how should we be thinking about that? And you know what, I'm gonna start probably with you, Jamie, and just ask you to talk a little bit about your work in New Orleans, what it looks like, what resonates. Common agenda might be one of the things, but please tell us about what you're doing and how it connects.
Sure,
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. So my work in New Orleans is around an initiative we call the Model City Initiative. And what this is a multi-year strategy or methodology for supporting a community and identifying how sport or physical activity can be used in an aligned and strategic fashion across all of the actors in a city to support that community's vision for where sport and physical activity can improve young people's lives. So in New Orleans, I work with a phenomenal team of grant partners. I can see at least 4 of them in this room, so I'm gonna use this stage to shine a light. I'd like these 4 to stand up. I can see 4 of them. Y'all stand up, come on. So part of what we do, this is at the core of the strategy, because we really consider this work not to be backbone driven or funder driven or anchor driven. It's conceiving that role in a way that is about empowerment and about uplift, and working with a team of local actors to find, in the space between us, how do we create change. So those grant partners are at the core of a coalition that we started working on about 18 months ago that is setting a strategy and really figuring out where can we have impact. We've identified 3 key areas. Those are physical activity, youth violence, and educational access and equity. And now what we're doing is trying to figure out how do we start moving the needle in those key areas. We've established several working groups that are looking at key projects to start making some changes in our community. And I think when you think about the collective impact frame, it's definitely one of those things where we didn't conceive of the initiative from the jump. We're gonna go do collective impact. I think it can be really confusing for partners, especially if you are trying to really go deep and get a very diverse and broad group of partners working together. I think it can be a little confusing, and people sometimes feel like, are we doing it yet? Have we checked the boxes? Are we doing the thing? And so I think there's something about understanding it as a methodology or a framework, but not necessarily an end goal. And I think to that end, thinking around issues of a common agenda and the difference between conceiving of a common agenda as something that you kind of plunk down on a table, and it's like a thing and it's ironclad, versus looking at common agenda as sort of a set of habits or spirits or some sort of will that exists in between people that actually helps us drive change. And that's what I have with my grant partners. And that's what I'm most excited about continuing to invest in.
Terrific, thank you. Sara, do you want to pick up on that? And I noticed from our pre-conversation before we got up on the stage that you two are kind of like long-lost sisters who found each other But talk about
long overdue,
talk
too.
about your work at Clinton Foundation, how it relates, and pick up on the thread.
Sure. And it is very similar to the work that Laureus is doing in New Orleans. Our focus right now is in Harris County, Houston area, Texas, with really the focus around access to sports for underserved youth. So, looking through the lens of the Clinton Foundation and really working to improve people's lives, and through the initiative that I work under, Clinton Health Matters initiative, which really focuses on domestic health. What can we do in this particular community, among others, to really improve health disparities and look at how people live, work, and play within their communities, very locally and broadly, to really improve health for them and their quality of life and well-being. And so with that, in the Houston, Harris County, we've pulled together youth-serving organizations, school districts, as well as I would actually say, with a focus really on underserved youth. And the focus is really on 5 populations. And this kind of ties into that continuous communication piece, where we're focused on girls, children with disabilities, LGBT youth, children from low-income communities, and children of color, to really look at, through organizations that work with them, through those lenses, what can we do to really make a difference? What can those organizations do within their own capacities to make improvements to what they deliver, whether it be through training coaches or asking kids what they want, any of those things. And then we've also pulled together other stakeholders, Department of Health, through the city and also the county, and then other sports leagues that really offer that more pay-to-play to kind of really bring another perspective to it, which can sometimes get a little crazy, bringing them all together in the same place. But really starting to kind of formulate those ideas and really start to empower those specific organizations to really make those changes on the ground for those specific populations, and then really starting to identify what specific areas that we need to target for specific programming, which then in turn helps the youth-serving organizations target their work a little bit better as well. And one of the other things that's really coming across to this group is just the networking opportunities. There's really no kind of group for youth sports organizations to say, yeah, I'm a part of this in our community, kind of like a chamber of commerce, right, where all these businesses come together that really focus on youth sports. And so that's sort of the model that this is starting to become for the interest of underserved youth and making change around health disparities. So it's kind of been a neat path forward as we've kind of taken on this. And our hope is to really then take this model and replicate it into other communities that we're working in throughout the country as well.
Cool. We'll have to circle back on a few things, but Bruce, I want to let you jump in, and I don't want to pigeonhole you, man. I already offended you because you're a super high-level researcher guy from Hopkins, but whatever you want to talk about, you don't only have to talk about measurement, but please tell us about your work. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I wanted to spread the geek cred and geekdom. We have a team of folks that works together, and what you saw with Tom's presentation was the result of a team effort. One of the team members here is Marie Ferguson, who has coordinated all of the efforts to build our computer models. So you mentioned understanding these systems and understanding how everything fits together. And I think as humans, we are limited in how far we can see. We can see maybe 1 degree, maybe 2 degrees, but beyond that, it's difficult for us to connect and see how things connect. And we've seen in many other fields where there's been the advent of computational techniques and simulation techniques that have really transformed many other fields. So if you think about the weather, for instance, think about before weather maps, which many of us weren't around before weather maps, but you essentially relied on maybe the farmer's almanac. You look at the stars and the moon and the sky, and maybe the cows are sleeping over there, and you're like, okay, it might rain in the next 2 hours, or maybe it might snow sometime in the next 2 years. So it was very haphazard. But then Once you started having these weather maps, which essentially are computer simulations. So when you see a weather map, it's a computer simulation that takes barometric pressure, the tidal waves, the land masses, the cloud formations, and links it all together and it shows how everything fits together. So when we plan for the weather, we don't sit there and say, okay, I'm just going to focus on the barometric pressure. I'm just going to look at that and locked in on that, and then that's how I'm going to plan, whether I'm going to bring an umbrella or what clothes I'm going to wear, or whether we should plan for snowfall or what have you. But that really brings everything together, and it's really transformed the field of meteorology. And the same thing can be said about manufacturing, transportation, air traffic control. We haven't had that same thing when it comes to physical activity. Because if you think about it, when you make any type of change in the community, and it can seem completely unrelated, like you plop down a building there, or you plop down a highway there, that's really going to affect the ecosystem. And that might affect, like if you put a highway in the middle of a playing field or separate two neighborhoods, suddenly you can't go to that playing field. Suddenly you might be like, well, I can't practice ball, so I think I'll just stay at home. And there are all these subtle effects, or some not so subtle effects, that people don't think about. So every decision that's made about a city or a community really has this reverberating effect and can affect the ability of someone to actually participate in physical activity or walk to school or what have you. And so what we do is we develop these computer simulation models. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with SimCity or SimEarth, or I guess there are many different Sims now. Well, we develop like Sim Physical Activity or Sim Community. So we develop these computer simulations of cities or towns, like for instance, a virtual Baltimore or virtual New Orleans or what have you. And that gives the opportunity to really see how everything fits together, and how you can then use these computer simulations to actually test, what's the impact of adding more parks or having more coaches or what have you. And then you can see all the reverberating effects. And that does several things. One is it shows how relationships and factors that you don't think really matter actually do matter. So you can actually plan and test things in the quote-unquote safety of a computer, although computers aren't always the safest thing. And then you can actually roll it out without wasting as much time, effort, and resources. But it also shows the broader impact of these programs. So all of you are involved in developing these physical activity interventions, and you can see the immediate impact, but what about the broader impact? And when we talk about broader impact, we're talking about beyond the sphere of the immediate people, we're talking about their connections, the community in general, but we're also talking about broader impact in terms of time. Because a lot of the effects of physical activity really accumulate down the road. And we've heard many, the First Lady mentioned about, and Billie Jean King mentioned about all the emotional and psychological benefits, the career benefits, and the physical activity benefits. Those are all down the road. So if you can't capture those immediately, then it's harder for you to advocate for your particular intervention. And you're missing a large piece of the pie. And you're really shortchanging what you're doing. I mean, the work that Jamie and Sara are doing is tremendous, but our current measures they only capture a fraction of it. And so we're really shortchanging their fantastic work. We know that their work is fantastic, but it really should be fantastic times X, Y times Y times Z, and we need to know what those X, Y, and Zs are. So the question is, are we measuring the right things? And that's one of the things that the computer simulations and also the advent of big data and all these other things can actually help us capture better.
It's great. Do you guys want to bring him to New Orleans and Houston respectively right away?
Yeah.
I mean, just to stay on it for a second, one of the things you help all of us to do is make the business case for this work, if you will, right? I mean, I think that's a real opportunity many of us would like to grab. And I think part of the challenge around this collaborative work is we don't always have the right metrics to make that case. And so I think it's worth just naming that as folks think about how to use your data system. And do you want to talk about how to access your research for the audience right now before we just move down the line, just real quick?
Yeah, well, so one of our goals is to develop these simulated cities, which then we progressively add to, and then they can be used to test different types of interventions. So if you have a particular program that you're interested in, or if you want to say, okay, what's the impact of either existing situations, like we know that there might be inequity in terms of access, there might be inequity in terms of social connections. What's the real impact of that? And not just immediately, but down the road. You know, how does that impact health? We know that physical activity can change weight management, can lead to a greater probability of being overweight or obese down the road, and then that ultimately can lead to all types of problems. Obesity is a major problem worldwide, and it's really the basis of a lot of diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, maybe different types of cancers, et cetera. And those all ultimately have costs and can have productivity losses and all those type of things. So you can use it to test current circumstances, and then what happens if you change? And what happens if you change the characteristics of your program? So you can actually represent your program and say, oh, well, what happens if I change this feature or change this compliance, et cetera? Again, just like a testing ground.
Great, thanks. And folks will get a chance to learn more about your work later today. Well, Laurence, this is kind of a great segue to you in a way. You're wearing multiple hats, but you've done a lot of research around the connect between sport and tourism and health and recreation. So a theme of kind of multi-systemic approaches emerges with your work. And then you're also focused on this statewide effort in Illinois. We'll hear from these guys how they're just struggling with New Orleans and Houston. You're taking on the whole state. But tell us about your background, your work, and how it connects to this panel and this conversation, please.
Yeah, sure. When Project Play got started, Tom challenged us to, what are you going to do when you go home? And so my response to that was, well, we'll carry this forward in parallel in the state of Illinois, and that's what we've been doing since the very beginning. And our project director from the very outset, and who's someone who's been working for the last couple of years on trying to make community change happen, probably knows as much about it as anybody here, is Raquel Hutchinson, who's sitting over here. And Raquel, if you could wave out so people can seek you out and capture your wisdom, because she knows a lot about how to do this kind of thing. We ran a summit as part of To Build the Agendas, where we brought together people who work in youth sport from throughout the state to really get a sense of what are your agendas, what are your concerns, and how can we proceed. And along the way, we formed a number of partnerships, and I want to highlight that because a lot of times we talk about the schools. Michelle Obama was very clear about talking about schools and worrying about the fact that we're losing sport in the schools. But in fact, what we found was that there were voices that were not typically being brought together. And two groups that we made a lot of effort to incorporate were Parks and Recreation as a formal collective. We did that by making sure that half the people who attended our summit were actually from Parks and Recreation. And in addition to that, we formed a formal partnership with the Illinois Park and Recreation Association and the Illinois Association of Park Districts. That helped us with our communications because prior to our summit, we were able to reach out through them and to participate also in their statewide conference. And we've done that at every conference since, and we've continued to work through them. We also reached out to the faith-based community because many of our best facilities actually turn out to be in various churches, sometimes quite hidden away, sometimes underutilized. And there are, of course, organizations that have worked heavily in sport, things like the Catholic Youth Organization, the JCCs, and the like. This has been very effective for us because, in fact, we needed a demonstration organization or site to get started right away. And with the JCCs came to us and said, we want to do this. Help us to do this. We will work with you along the way. Parks and Recreation has also stayed with us very closely. We formed working groups with people who wanted to be involved, and we set up communications channels through those as well. What we found in this, a couple of things I want to highlight in our findings along the way. One is that many of the things that are in the Project Play report are in fact already very, very much on the minds of a lot of the practitioners who deliver youth sport, at least in our state. The youth sport providers are aware of the kinds of things that are suggested there. Particularly, they want to be more child-centered in their delivery, and they're very concerned about the quality of programs that are out there. They are concerned that, in fact, the issue isn't the programs they offer, but the demand for the programs they want to offer. That, in fact, there isn't the parents who are the ones who actually purchase the programs for their kids. Those parents are looking for programs they think are going to get their kid a scholarship one day, programs that are going to make them elite. And they're being encouraged by private providers very often who have an economic stake in grabbing a kid and holding on to them for years in a specialized program, some of them starting as early as the ages of 4 and 5, to believe that they must specialize early and that they need to be going intensive very quickly. And as a result, they find that it's to get parents aware of these other alternatives in a way that actually builds demand for those is an issue. And one of the things that Raquel worked very hard with them on in the last little while, it's been very well received, is actually on how do we begin to remarket our programs by shifting the demand so that people will insist on the kinds of programs we want to offer. Because much as they want to offer these programs, they're not, in fact, what they think people will necessarily purchase. The other thing we've discovered is that, in fact, they also are concerned about their resourcing. That as we said at the beginning here, these people are busy, and they're oftentimes under-resourced in their delivery systems. And to say, we're going to make some changes, we're going to start to redo things. It may mean having to offer some programs in parallel while we continue to offer the things we used to do. We're beginning to shift. We need more stuff. Where are those resources going to come from? Who's going to help us to do this? And although we've tried to help as much as we can through the University of Illinois, we're limited in what we have to offer because it's not free, even for us. I mean, there's commute costs, there's delivery costs, there's personnel costs. We have our own challenges as well. And so we've gone out and tried to seek funding for those things. And this is, I think, one of the biggest concerns we have all along. And that is that, in fact, when we talk to funders, much as we talk about needs for change at the grassroots, we have had a number of national organizations who have spoken highly about doing the kinds of things in the Project Play report that have actually said to us directly, well, actually, we don't fund anything that isn't national. We've also had people say to us things like, well, we don't see a return on investment for this particular sponsorship if we go there. We're not clear on how to make something happen at local levels. We also find that sport is actually not easily funded from the standpoint of donations. Yes, people sponsor entertainment sport, but youth sport, they might throw out some T-shirts for a Little League, but the fact is that when we go to organizations that say they work on health, they'll say, well, actually we do health, but that's not really, sport's not really about health. Physical activity, sport, I don't think so. So in fact, the challenge we face is how do we begin to resource sport at the grassroots? And at this moment, that has been the largest challenge we face because in fact what we're seeing is we don't need to advocate for the kinds of things we're talking about here because the people who are delivering there for the most part already believe it. So they don't want to do it, but we need to change the contingencies under which they work.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we have the benefit of a number of funders on this panel who might help answer that. And I mean, the short answer, pivoting to Renata, is that it's easy. You just host an Olympics, make it profitable, take the large endowment from that and invest it in community. Am I right? Like that's how you finance the work.
One thing that resonated with me that the First Lady said was 3 things, and I think what resonates most to me is the first 4 are important, but the backbone infrastructure is critically important. And that's what we've ostensibly served as in Los Angeles, and we fund programs from Santa Barbara to San Diego County, so we have a very wide swath, is having an organization with 30 years of history and engagement within the community. And we fund underserved communities, grassroots organizations, and the resources are a key element to that. One of my first meetings, I've been on board for about 5 months, and one of my first meetings was with Tom in Project Play. And I said, we do all of those things, but really challenged to look at how we can actually take our legacy to the next level, looking at collective impact. And it's about priority intense investment. I worked for, prior to joining the LA84 Foundation, the LA Dodgers. I ran their community relations and foundation, so I'm very familiar with how sports teams view youth sport. My 4-month, 5-month assessment of our market is it's highly fragmented with very well-meaning individuals, a ton of youth organizations, both grassroots and professional and leagues, and they're all competing for the same dollars, all of them. We have funded over 2,200 organizations to the tune of $225 million, and we're not even scratching the surface in terms of our impact. And so for me, backbone infrastructure is, can we take our 30 years of legacy, our 30 years of history, and yes, the benefit of having a resource to be the first dollar in, and bring those other organizations, so we're opening our door and becoming that chamber of commerce for youth sports in our market, and then to be able to elevate that voice. And how are we doing that? We've got 8 professional teams in Los Angeles, sports teams in Los Angeles. We've got 9 Division I NCAA sports teams. We've got some of the largest foundation that focus on health, wellness, socio-emotional health, and education. So let's bring them together and focus on what are those priority project gaps in the market that they're naturally engaged in. Dodgers Dream Field, AEG, soccer fields with their Galaxy and the Kings. And so we're looking to bring awareness to where is it that we can pick 1 to 3 big bets over the next 5 years. How do we collectively bring our resources? And again, we'll put in $1. We can't do it all on our own. And then how do we leverage that impact in a community, then move to the next community? And then equally important is being able to measure the success of that, and then using vehicles like Project Play, that is sort of the national connector, to tell that story of the impact and the investment and the best case practices of how we've actually done it in our region, which is pretty large. And right now, we've got the next 14 months, given that we're competing for the 2024 games in Los Angeles. There's a lot of focus being placed on us. So to the extent I'm only 29, I look like I'm 40, because we've been moving at a very fast pace to be very intentional of being able to capture this moment that's palpable for us in Los Angeles to really show what the benefits of the Project Play Summit and the work that they've done, and certainly what we can do around collective impact.
Exciting. So let's open it up. I don't know if you guys want to react quickly to some of what the others have shared and just jump in, and I'd love to have a conversation. So any quick thoughts about other folks? Yeah, Bruce.
Yes, I guess one of the another drawback of not having good systems measures is not being able to identify win-win situations. Mm-hmm. So Renata just mentioned, well, people are competing for the same pot of money, et cetera, but there can be a lot of synergies among the different efforts, and I think we're missing those things because, again, the measures are so individual project focused. They don't really capture what's happening in the system. You could make a case to a professional sports team, for instance, that funding a lot of these activities really ultimately will give them a great return on investment. Exactly. Because it generates interest in the teams, it generates a future fan base, they're showing a broader impact on the community. There's all these different synergies that aren't being captured.
But I think it goes back to your point earlier about what data to collect, and then when you're talking about grassroots organizations, good luck if one of our grassroots organizations has a computer system, they're still taking, roll by hand. Yeah. And so now you're saying, well, we want you to measure your participation, we want you to measure impact. And so what we're looking at doing as a backbone organization is, can we be the repository, create some systems that our nonprofit partners can join in on? Mm-hmm. Then we're able to collect that data and reflect back. And I think earlier this afternoon you got a Beyond the Bell one-pager. It's a partnership we have with LAUSD. We're collectively working and funding that research and that measurement so that we can then elevate that voice and show it's working.
But you both hit on great points. Let me just ask the audience and the panelists, how many of you actually use this ROI approach, return on investment argument, for your work? How many of you are actually thinking ROI all the time? Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I mean, I think a lot of grassroots folks aren't able to get to that ROI space, and this is the role that funders and aggregators can help with. A couple of themes that came up for all of you as you think about deeper collaborative approaches that make change in community is this idea of working groups and how you make that work. How many folks are part of working groups across the different work that you're all doing in the field? Yeah. So that's an easy one. And then this cross-system, cross-sector piece, which is so freaking hard. Scratch that from the video recording. But are there examples that you all that would call out around because in the end, like the resource question that Laurence raised so eloquently is one about repurposing and leveraging public revenue streams at the end of the day. How do you do that? How do you think about the public sector? And then we're going to open it up for questions. No, we don't have time for questions. Okay. So just the larger question of public systems.
I can speak a little bit about our work in New Orleans because we really are very much a grassroots coalition at our core. We've got good cross-sector representation, but the heart of that team is grassroots change makers working in community day in, day out on a shoestring. And so one of the things we do is we look at how do we leverage our kind of national and global role as a foundation to bring in resources. So we've partnered with Dr. Lee and his team to look at how can we use their resources to then create the kind of advocacy tools we need to start really addressing, so that we're not just saying, believe us, but believe us in concert with the data, believe the capacity to build partnerships between the most sort of grassroots, independent, community-based organization and an organization like Hopkins. See that capacity to partner together, see the proof, and then let's start talking about systems level change.
Great. Okay, we're closing comments, and then we're gonna, so everyone knows, if you want more time with any of the panelists, we're gonna be in a side room down the hall that way for meet and greet, deeper conversations, so feel free to join us. Any final parting tweets? Do it in a tweet if you can, but a full sentence is okay. Closing sentence, anybody?
I'll just add on to hers. I don't know how good of a closing it will be, but just thinking about leveraging local resources. You know, the Clinton Foundation is an operating foundation. A lot of people don't know that. So we really try to leverage and facilitate locally funding and different things. And so next week I'm doing a town hall specifically on this, and how do we have that conversation with funders and programmatic folks, organizations, to really come up with that cross-sector solutions. And so stay tuned. I'll have more information after next week. We're
on the panel for next year.
Yeah.
Anybody else, future closing comments about the?
You want it on tweet format?
Yeah, tweet it out.
So we need more hashtag systems approaches to sports and how it connects with everything else.
Fabulous.
Hashtag keep doing what you're doing, the power of play.
Great. All right. Well, I think great insights around deep, hard work and community, and it's only begun. So let's thank our panelists, and thank you all for. Thank you.